people will say, well, I'm not a leader. You are, right? You lead yourself. You may influence the team around you. You may influence teams that you work with cross-functionally. So you have an impact on the business every day. I'm a firm believer in this grassroots impact of if we each do one thing, the multiplier effect will be really large. And so I think I challenge everyone to say, like, what is it I'm going to do tomorrow? It doesn't have to be lofty. It can just be something small to get started, and then it will kind of, spiral or spin up into something that's really impactful.
Welcome to the She's So Sweet podcast, where we interview accomplished women who have worked their way to the C-suite. I'm your host, Christy Falteruso, Chief Customer Officer and award-winning customer success executive. I am really excited to introduce today's guest. We've got Laura Ritchey, CEO of Radial, with us today. Hi, Laura. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Christy. Thanks for having me. Excited to have this conversation.
Oh my gosh. After reviewing your background and your experience, I am like sitting on the edge of my seat for today's conversation because I know that you are going to be sharing so much wisdom with me and all of our listeners. So I'm so grateful for the time you're giving us.
You're so kind. I appreciate it. I look forward to diving right in.
Very good. Well, listen, before we get to all the good stuff, I think it'd be great if we could tell the listeners a little bit more about your role at Radial as CEO, and maybe even tee them up a little bit about your previous roles and some of the other amazing companies that you've been at.
Happy to talk about my journey because I do think it's a bit of an eclectic one when I think back my own self. So as CEO of Radial, I really lead the strategic direction and the growth of an e-commerce logistics company. So Radial was founded in 1999 when selling on the internet was just really becoming a thing, and has really evolved over that time period to be the owner of that click to delivery experience. So when you click purchase. And so in my role, it's thinking about not only how do we deliver excellent service, how do we develop a people culture that's important for our teams, but how do we also really evolve and retain that heritage as an entrepreneurial company that really kind of started this internet offering of e-commerce. And so it's really exciting. I've moved from operations roles. So if I think back, I really started in finance and consulting and learning about the business world, right? So that for me has been interesting. I started in a consulting company in Arthur Andersen a long time ago and learned about the business world before moving to work for a client. And I worked for Cardinal Health, which is here in Columbus, Ohio. And what was great about that is it was founder. So that was my first experience of really working for a public company, but that was led by a very strong founder who had a strong vision. And I do think that as a leader, you develop some different skills working for founder-led businesses. And then similarly moved over to limited brands. So, another founder-led business, had the opportunity to work with a lot of great retail brands. And that sort of really started me into retail, where I was able to then work for full beauty brands and centric brands, learning more about different apparel lines, learning more about wholesale businesses, before ultimately ending up at Radial, which is really the service provider to those brands today. So it's been a rich journey of learning about customers. So of course, I'm not as experienced as you on the revenue officer and the marketing side, but really understanding the customer. And that's really what I try to bring to Radial is, how do we speak the same language as our brands? How do we think about the customer in the same way that our brands do, so that we're true partners to them in delivering that customer experience?
It's so amazing, Laura. And I think, the most successful organizations that I've seen are where you do have CEOs that really are invested in the customers, right? And so I love that you have not only that kind of full circle journey of experiences, but that you put your customer at the center of the business as you think about its growth and future.
Absolutely. I think really you learn that in retail, right? So there was an expectation that no matter what job you had at limited brands, you were in the stores. My children remember, being in the stores at peak and us like cleaning up a table that might have been shopped and looked a little bit messy. And so it is funny now that they're grown, how they think about those experiences of, being in the store on Black Friday or the Thursday night before Black Friday to prepare. It's sort of our holiday tradition, I guess you would say.
Oh, that's so great. I love that. Well, I assume, and I always say this, I don't know why I make any assumptions because I should know better at this point, but you didn't always want to do this, right, Laura? This wasn't like your dream job, right? When you think back to yourself growing up or even just starting your education, what did you want to be? Because maybe it wasn't this.
Yeah, I certainly would have never said if I reflect back now, oh, I'll be the CEO of an e-commerce logistics company. I think really, I was a STEM person, so I really wanted to focus in science and math. That led me to believe that I wanted to be a medical doctor. As I made my way through high school and into college, I really got focused on research. So I thought that medical research and finding cures would be interesting. It would allow me to use my math skills and my science skills, right? Since there's obviously a piece of both of those. And I was lucky enough to have an opportunity then to work in a hospital and an internship, and then also to work in a research lab. And I learned it's not for me. And so it's kind of an interesting revelation. You've grown up with this idea of what you want to be, and then all of a sudden you have a self-awareness. Thankfully, I realized at that age to say that's not really what I want to do. And part of it was I was lonely, right? I craved a different type of interaction. I had gotten exposure to business in college and found that to be super interesting. And so I was lucky enough to have some good advisors and some good business mentors who were able to steer me to the path, which ultimately put me into law school and getting my MBA. And that's really how I ended up somehow business out of all of this. So it's been such an eclectic journey, and that's really what I would encourage people to do. If you would have asked me when I was 20, 22 or 25, I would have said I'm going to be a tax partner in a big 5 public accounting firm, because that's the career I was on. If you would have asked me 10 years later, I would have said I'm going to be a CFO, because that's the journey I'm on. If you would ask that, I would have said I'm going to be a head of operations, because now I'm doing operations. So it is being open to this idea of don't define yourself by a title, but define yourself by what you want to accomplish.
I love that so much, and very similar to you. So I started my career, I thought I went to school and I was going to be an accountant. And similarly, I was like, wait, I have to just do this all day by myself, and it's just math and numbers. And I quickly realized that wasn't for me. And I ended up pivoting to communications and public relations, which has definitely been more aligned with my journey for sure. So I love that your story kind of goes full circle. Are there aspects of the science and like that research though that you miss, or you feel like or are there ways that you still kind of bring that into where you are today?
Well, what I really realized is it's analysis and problem solving. It's the ability to link things together, to see patterns. And I learned that that's what appealed to me. So it wasn't so much, maybe it was the accolades of a big cure that was interesting, but it was more about my mind thinks in ways that wants to problem solve, that wants to use analysis and data to support outcomes and conclusions. And so it's again so grateful to the mentors and to the professors I had at the time who helped me realize that those were the skills I had, and I was just looking for a place for those to be successful. And then I went to law school, right? And I thought, oh, I'm going to be a lawyer. And then I was like, that seems kind of lonely too, because they put you in the law library for like 5 years and make you write a lot of papers. So when I had the opportunity to go into a client service business, that was more appealing. The ability to learn on the job and to interact with people was really appealing to me.
I love that story. And I think it kind of serves into the next question that I want to dig into, which is like, as you think about your career, and you've already shared some of these with us, but what were some of those real pivotal moments or decisions that you feel really contributed to where you are today?
It's so great that you asked that. So one of the interesting things for me is my father was a policeman in the state of Ohio, which means that every time that you wanted to be promoted, you had to move to another location. And so I went to a different school starting in 5th grade. I went to a different school for my senior year of high school. And so those were moments where at the time, of course, devastated teenager, how can you do this to me, with lots of tears. But in reflection, it taught me adaptation skills, agility skills, reaffirmed I'm an extrovert in terms of being able to meet people and build relationships. And so that I think was a pivotal moment in my background that I was able to do that. I actually find I'm a bit nomadic at this point in my life with my children grown as well. My husband and I see that a bit. So that was definitely a big impact on my career. I think the other one is moving from finance into operations, which I was here this happy finance person. I had these numbers, I had these spreadsheets. I felt so comfortable. There were plans. And then they throw me into operations and do things like, hey, we want to start this new business. Why don't you check it out and come out with a plan, along with the team? And I thought, well, like, is there a playbook for this or some instruction manual? But again, blessed to have great business partners and mentors to really help me say, okay, it's problem solving. It's the same thing that you do unstructured. So you have to get comfortable with that. But I remember those first 3 months were a little bit tough as you kind of navigated this less structured environment. But now it's kind of just status quo, right? That's how mine is. So.
Well, now you weren't a CEO at another company before you joined Radial, right? So this was your first opportunity to step into that CEO role. Tell me a little bit about making that leap, because I feel like that's always one that I hear from folks is different than maybe what you expect, and nothing can prepare you for it. I always equate this to like childbirth and having children, right? Like you're never really prepared. What did that journey look like for you as a professional, going from some of these other roles to now the CEO?
Yes, I was a COO. And in retail, usually if you're on the operations side, you don't become the CEO, right? So for me, I kind of reached the pinnacle of where I thought it would be. I'm an operations leader. I had been doing this for 6 or 7 years. So the opportunity to CEO was amazing, but I was not prepared, right? Because it wasn't kind of something that I'd had in my toolkit. So for me, a couple things have helped. I have a coach, right? So I have an external executive coach who has a lot of years of experience, who has been awesome in helping me navigate that. I also actually reached out to people that I would call my frenemies. So there are competitors, but there are people who went on a similar journey to me, right? Who went from COO to CEO, maybe expected or unexpected, and said, what did you learn? What would you do differently? What would you look back on? And so that's been really helpful. And as you would expect, the biggest hurdle is I want to do my old job. It's comfortable. I know operations. I know the business. And so the ability to say, no, I'm not going to do that. That is not my role. I'm in a different role now, and not let myself go back to that comfort zone. For Radial, we support a lot of brands through the peak holiday season. So the fact that I became CEO on September 15th, and we're heading into our peak season made an ultimate test, right, of whether I was going to be able. I'd give myself maybe a B minus, but doing better now, as I know that I need to move and learn and focus on different things. But again, I think it's drawing on your community. So many people will help and want to share advice, but then you have to remember it's advice. It is not your roadmap, and you cannot build your plan on what other people have done. You should be informed. And what my coach told me is, your gut got you here. Keep listening to it. Never ultimately change who you are as a leader in your gut, because those capabilities did get you there.
I love that. Was there one part of making this leap that you feel like was the most challenging for you to navigate? Outside of maybe trying to do your old role, because that was comfortable, because I could definitely relate to that. But what would you say was the hardest part or the hardest adjustment that you had to make coming in as CEO?
I think it's just an enormous shift of responsibility, right? Owning a piece of the business versus the responsibility of the whole business being under your purview, I think is an adjustment. And so really thinking about my leadership team, the skill sets that we each have, how we complement each other, how we stay aligned from a leadership perspective. And so that to me was a mental shift as well, because of course I always felt accountability to the business. I led most of the team, but it is just a different chair when at the end of the day, you're accountable, right? The buck literally stops here, and you have to you have to own that, but you also can't let it be paralyzing, which is quite possible. There's tons of articles out there now around, CEO expectations being so much harsher than they used to be. The pace of change is accelerated. And so I'm like, oh, okay, that I feel better now because, they're feeling what I'm feeling, right? Like there's just this constant need to keep up and outpace and grow. So
Oh man, I often think about if my journey will ever lead me there, and I'm always too terrified to even consider that far ahead. But good for you for taking that leap, and it seems like you've been doing a wonderful job there. Now, rising to the top, I always say it doesn't come without its battle scars, and so I can't imagine, though, although your journey is amazing and obviously has led you to where you are today, there's probably some obstacles that you had to overcome and some hurdles there that you navigated. Can you share with us maybe some of those obstacles, what they look like, and really how you tackled those head on?
sure. And I think one will be one many of us have faced as women in leadership, which is there's just not enough of us. So, particularly in the logistics industry, I can count numerous meetings where I was the only female, or if I wasn't, then there might have been one other one that was present in the room. So, being able to be a leader and really bring your femininity, or however we want to refer to that, and allowing yourself to have however that plays out for you, whether it's bringing more EQ, whether it's potentially bringing more empathy than some of the other leaders in the room, I think is really important. And the best advice I got is because I think as women, many of us tend to want to go into the room and prove we're smart and prove that we earn the chair. And so I became more vocal than I needed to be. And so I wanted to prove I was smart. And I had somebody who sat me down and said, we know you're smart. It's great that you're telling us, but your voice is overshadowing your ears, right? So back to you have two ears and one mouth for a reason. And so it really changed my perspective, and it caused me to pause. Why was I commenting? Was it because I needed to justify my seat at the table? Or was it because I had something to value add? And it helps you as a leader, right? Because as you continue to go up the leadership change, it should be less about you talking and more about you listening and providing coaching to your team. So a really invaluable obstacle that turned into a great learning and teaching moment for me that's helped me really progress in my career.
It's so interesting that you talk about that, because I'm always very interested to hear when I speak to leaders who, find themselves in these organizations where it is primarily male dominated and they are the only woman or one of very few, some of the comments that are made to them and how that changes their behaviors as they continue to move forward. And it's also interesting to hear you called out something very, I guess, what seems obvious now that you've said it out loud, but yeah, I do think that we all try to justify our existence because we never want to feel like we're here to check a box or fill a quota for a company, especially now as we see DEI become bigger, right? Like there is more of a focus to diversify teams, and you never want to be the token person who is there to fill a quota and not because we've earned a right to sit in that spot. And I do think that there's a little bit of this justification that happens, and you've demonstrated the example there of, maybe speaking too much to just justify. And I hadn't heard it articulated that way before, but you hit on a very obvious point.
Right. But if you don't have somebody that calls it to your attention, you don't see it, right? Because
Right.
you're just sitting in the moment of, I'm the only woman here. I do think also, and we talk about this a lot, but you really have to stand your ground in terms of what you will accept in terms of behaviors towards you, microaggressions and things like that, when you want to speak up about it. I do think there are times where potentially as women, we want to over distort to every injustice or every slight that's being directed our way. I've warmed up coffee for a leader before. And was that the moment to throw it on the floor and demonstrate my rejection of being put in that role? It wasn't, but did I make it clear that will never happen again? And here's my role. So I do think it's also figuring out the way, how do you advocate for yourself in a way that makes you feel comfortable? How do you address when things happen that shouldn't happen? How do you take a stand? So I take, now that I'm in a CEO role, I take my role very seriously as being the person that needs to intervene if I see it happening and perhaps the person isn't comfortable speaking up. So I have very specific I'll call them rules, but expectations from my team about how we behave and how we don't behave. And I don't think that you can allow much flex from that, because it basically gives other people permission to behave in ways that are just not how we want to be. So
I love that you're creating that culture for other folks. I mean, just for everybody, right? Because everyone benefits from that type of structure in those conversations. So good for you. The She's So Sweet podcast is brought to you by Client Success. Client Success is an all-in-one customer success platform to help post-sale implementation and success teams manage customers from new to renew. Through an industry-leading platform approach, Client Success gives businesses an in-depth view into customer health, product usage trends, along with churn and risk data so that your team can not only retain customers, but help them grow as well. Whether it's managing customer onboarding workflows in shared portals, building custom health scores, tracking sentiment with NPS surveys, or doing more with less through AI and automations, Client Success gives customer success professionals a true one-stop platform to manage all aspects of the customer journey. To learn more about the industry's fastest to implement customer success platform, visit www.clientsuccess.com. That's Client Success. Simple, powerful customer success. Now, as you think, was there any other obstacles or challenges that you faced? One of the things that I think we talked about before we started recording was maybe dealing with, some of the ability to take the feedback, how it's going to serve us well in our trajectory. But is there anything else that you feel that hindered you or became a challenge significantly that you had to work through?
I think it's really these preconceived notions and sometimes that I put on myself about where I need to be and what I needed to be. So I had these very by this year, I need to be at this level and I need to be in this role. And I do believe that can make you closed-minded about other opportunities or thinking about doing something different and taking on those roles. So I do also find that although there are, of course, limits, right, to places where the glass ceiling is still in places, or the broken rung, as McKinsey has started to talk about, where you can't get where you need to be, I do believe we still impose these rules upon ourselves about, I have to achieve this and I'm not successful unless I do. So I had to really overcome that myself to say, I'm defined by the people that I get to work with, right? I'm defined by being able to drive success in business, to influence the community in the way that I want, to build a culture that I want. And it's not necessarily setting these time and date stamps. I'm not saying don't have high aspirations and not shoot for the moon, but maybe a slightly less rigid than where I started.
No, that's so smart, Laura. And I even feel like folks that are still holding on to their next role and specific title and understanding that, listen, you can move up in your career and it doesn't need to be people management, right? There's not a specific end in mind, right? You have to be more flexible to open yourself up to these opportunities. I mean, look at yourself. You even said a great example earlier, right? What you thought you would be doing at this point when you were 25 look very different than maybe 5 years later and then after that. So, but it was your open-mindedness, I have to assume, and your willingness to be flexible about that and take on new opportunities and new challenges that got you to where you are, right?
For sure. I think that, but I also think having some people to push you, right? Because I still think that as women, we're sort of ingrained in this ask for permission instead of forgiveness mindset. And we really have to potentially have someone push us. Now, certainly, as you know, I've been doing this for a long time. So as I see the people that have come behind us, I feel less of that, which I'm super grateful, because then that means that those of us who've gone ahead and made a difference, but we have more to do for sure.
Well, very good. Well, I always, one of the things I love to do is actually talk about successes. As much as failures, we learn from them, and the obstacles are very interesting. I feel like as women, we're not sitting around celebrating our successes and the impact that we've had quite enough, right? We're always so humble. We're focused on our next goal. Where are we going next? But I think it's important for us to take a moment's pause. And so I want to do that with you. And I want to hear, as you reflect back on your very successful career, what were some of those big milestones that you feel really proud of, that you love to kind of reflect on and recognize?
So for me, it's really about being able to influence the career trajectory of others. So this is sort of probably weird, but people over their career as they've moved on to other roles have written me, notes about how our time together was, helpful to them. And so I love to read that because I think it really helps to reinforce that we do make a difference. To your point, we're always focused on what's the next problem, what's the next problem. So being able to think that, my leadership or my partnership with some teammates were able to help them. And ironically, right, in my role as CEO of Radial, some of those people are actually my clients now who've moved into senior leadership roles that were in much more junior leadership roles than when perhaps we worked past in our career. So I get a lot of joy from the success of that. I also feel like, we've done a really nice job in Radial in terms of how we shaped our business. Obviously, e-commerce has been on this incredibly up and down journey, right? Where we came out of COVID and we were growing, everyone was growing at 35 or 40%. Not quite like that anymore, right? As we see both macroeconomic headwinds. And so for me, being able to have been agile as a company to kind of see that probably this was a tailwind that may not last forever, and position our company to be more healthy in terms of our people, more healthy financially, I feel like is a big success. So I'm really proud of how the team has been performing here at the company.
That's wonderful. And I think, the fact that you do have former folks that have worked with you alongside of you and under you, reaching out to you later as they see their careers blossoming and sharing their learnings and how you've impacted them is a huge testament to the type of leader that you are. So you should be really proud of that. And thank you for sharing that story. Now, I know part of this comes with the empowerment of women, and you've just talked about this, right? Like how you're doing this even in your day to day. But this is something I'm always very interested in because I do love that saying, empowered women empower women. And as we were prepping for our recording today, I kind of shared some examples of, hey, that used to not be a thing. You didn't have women empowerment before. But I love to see more women championing other women alongside of them and cheering them on and helping for their success. So how is that something that you kind of live and kind of integrate into your day-to-day and even into your leadership right now as you think about the future female leaders?
So at the company, right, we have a resource, a women's initiative network resource group where we really try to overtly talk about that. And so my big thing to the business is reach a hand back. Always be thinking about who are those one or two people that have high potential that are maybe not getting those opportunities. Because if every woman leader brings along 5 or 10, and then they bring along 5 or 10, right, we have the multiple effect. And so that's a more structured way that we approach it. And I talk a lot with the team about, how we do that. What does that look like? It doesn't have to be, sometimes I think we think it has to be like life changing versus just saying, hey, I think you would be great. Why don't you take a leap and try this opportunity, and really seeing how they can develop. And I like to do that obviously across both all leaders, men and women in the company, but specifically focused on women. I'm also a big advocate of mentorship. So my rule is if you reach out to me and you ask me for help, I will find time. So don't presume that I'm too busy or I'm not interested, or whatever reason that you decide that you're not going to reach out to me and ask for advice or help, because I feel like if you have the gumption to do that, then I will do it. Then I'll make the time. And so I think that's super important, and I'm always willing to do that. And then I also support my college because I live in the town where that is, and so that gives me a great opportunity to mentor and to focus on women as well. But I really think we're like afraid to ask for help, or we're conditioned not to ask for help. And there's just people are so welcoming. As I shared when I was doing my transition, people would always respond, even if it was just, I can't right now, let's talk later. Right. So I think we have to remove that self-imposed limit that we put.
It's funny. So in several of the episodes that we've recorded so far, I hear a lot of folks talk about like the advice that they wish that they had had when they were younger, earlier in their career was like, it's okay to ask for help. And that asking for help is a superpower, right? But we have this preconceived notion that if we ask for help, it shows weakness and that or incompetence. And I love that you're kind of leaning in to the women who are asking for help and helping them recognize that, like, yes, if you ask, you're going to get it. And it's going to serve you well if you do.
Yes, because the more you reinforce that, then it gets into a thing, right? Because then they'll do that with others. But every time when someone says that, like, "Oh, you're so busy, I didn't want to bother you," I'm like, "That's on you, right? You decided that you should ask. Let me tell you that I can't right now, or that that we'll do it later." But I think that accessibility is really important across all levels of the organization. So I skip down all the way to our hourly associates, up to my direct reports too, because I think it's important that we don't just start to think about the layer or two below us, but that we're reaching our hands all the way down into the teams that we manage.
I think it's so great, Laura. I love that. Now, I have to spend some time on this because this is something that comes up all the time when especially for women who are earlier in their professional journeys and trying to think about what their future looks like personally and professionally. There is this idea that we can find a harmonious balance in being a C-level executive or a female executive and balancing our personal lives. How do you think about that? How do you think about creating balance for yourself as a professional and as a person?
I think about balance over a longer horizon, right? So to me, people will say like, "Oh, my balance for the day or my balance for the week." I look at it more of sometimes my family wins, sometimes work wins, sometimes no one wins, right? Because I can only do so much of everything. And so that's really how I got comfortable with it. I also set kind of non-negotiables around what I wouldn't do. So these once in a lifetime events, walking my son across the lacrosse field, right, for his senior game, being at my daughter's ceremony for graduation or for soccer, and all those moments that would have come up to that, throughout their years. And as they continue to develop, I think that's really key, is that you don't let yourself, get talked out of that. So I went to an Asia trip with our whole team a day late because I refused to miss one of those events. And, people were like, "Oh my gosh, this could impact your career. You're going to be so tired." And I'm like, well, I can manage that, right? It's important for me to be there, and I will deal with it, and I will be tired, but I'll figure it out. And don't try to do that for me. Let me make these decisions. Right. But we have to speak up, because otherwise you compromised and you don't feel good about anything. I think also, as I've gotten older, I really appreciate self-care. I feel like people have been saying that forever, but when you're, particularly I think as a parent, and having now my parents are getting older, you just feel so much pressure to be the caregiver and to be responsible to all those people, that it's super easy to put yourself at the bottom of the pile. And I want to have a very healthy next chapter at some point in time, and you just don't realize how it impacts you to not take care of yourself, right, during these times now, as you head towards those later years. So I know everyone says it, but you have to define what it is for you. Like, I'm not good at yoga. I could try to keep trying, but it's not my thing. So I have to find my thing too. So don't let people tell you have to meditate or you have to do yoga. You do whatever your thing is for self-care.
All right, Laura, so I got to dig into that for a minute. So what is your thing? What are the things that you enjoy that you do for yourself?
So I do Orange Theory. So for me, I need somebody.
Did you know that I do Orange Theory?
I did.
Laura, I have to grab this little visual here. Look, I have my splat point.
Oh,
so for anybody
wow.
anyone who's looking, if you're watching this and listening, I have a little Orange Theory splat point here at my desk. So that's so funny. I love that.
Well, and it's not surprising, right? Given I'm a rule follower background. So I have to be in class. I have someone bossing me around and telling me where to go. And for an hour, I can just be mindless. And you get all the benefits of cardio, weights. And so the efficiency of it also really appeals to me. I think also just spending time with friends. So I love red wine, being able to spend time with friends and talk with friends. They've actually done so many studies that show that people who spend time with friends and who have a healthy friend and support network have a much happier and a longer lived life. And so sometimes it's easy to let work or, your family responsibilities pull you away from that. And I do think it's important as women, we say it's okay if I go to book club, which is code for drinking wine, and someone else watches my child for that night, right? Like the world will move on, and I should not feel guilty about that.
I love that. Well, good for you. Now I want to pivot a little bit here and talk more about the advice that we wish we had earlier in our career, because you just offered us a lot of wisdom through your journey, through our conversation so far. But when you look back, what's the one piece of advice you wish you had earlier that you feel would have had a significant impact on you professionally?
I think thinking more about significance, right? And so people talk a lot about, is it important about status, but thinking about like early on, and some people are using the word purpose, but I like significance a little bit better. What will I look back on and feel proud about? What will I look back on and feel happy about? And so somebody told me, when you're feeling moments of stress, think about in 2 years from now or 5 years from now, if you will even remember what's happening right now that is giving you such angst. And the answer is you won't, largely. I mean, now I don't want to be dismissive of, life events or illness or things like that. But in general, I have found that I'm like, I will not even remember this. And yet I'm so agitated about it in the moment. And so really then thinking about, how do I manage my thought process? And you have to put yourself far enough in the future, right? That it is less impactful. But then what's the significance? Then what is it? If it's not the problem of today or the problem of tomorrow, what will be my significance? And I don't remember anyone ever talking about these things. It was, right, you would graduate and you have a family and you would work and you would do great, and you would get some nice titles, and then someday you'll retire. And really, like, what's that mean? What is the significance of what you've done, and how would you make different life choices now or back then that maybe not have changed your trajectory, but just gave yourself some grace in terms of how your little voice talks to yourself about whether you're doing well or not well.
I think that's great. I don't think I've heard anyone say that. And I don't even think that I've ever heard it or reflected on that. So I think that's such sage advice. And I'm glad that you brought that up. Now we're going to talk about the future of your career, because I'm always very interested, because I always say, like, some of the women I speak to, right, you're at the peak, or what seemingly is the peak of your career. But I have to imagine, with the level of ambition that you have, that it's not going to end here. So when you think about your future, your goals, initiatives that you're excited about, what does that look like?
I think that's where I'm getting more informed about the idea of significance, right? So I've been reading a couple different books about this, because I don't really love this like next chapter thing. It makes it sound like, I'm going to do this huge life pivot and I'm going to, start being super good at tennis or golf or something, which is certainly important, right? And part of my future aspiration. But I think it is more about, with the skill set that I've developed, what do I do with that? And how can I use that to help others? And is that in a not-for-profit setting? Is that in a business setting? And so at this point, I'm trying not to set limits, because it's super easy for me to tactically define that next thing. I would like to be on a board. And then I'm like, oh, I'm happy I have a goal. But I don't want to think about it that way. I want to think about, I built my career by creating a tool set of skills. And what skills do I want to keep acquiring, right? Because the world is changing so quickly that it would be easy to lose relevance in terms of staying up to speed on everything. And so how do I do that and continue lifelong learning, but then also think about a way to deploy my skills when the time is right to do that? And so I'm purposely not boxing myself in right now, which feels a little uncomfortable, I have to be honest. But more to come on that.
Oh, very good. Now, as we think about the future of female in leadership roles in business, what does that look like? What are some of the concerns that you have, or the thoughts on how we need to continue to advance females in these roles and positions of power?
That's a great question. And I referenced before the McKinsey Women in the Workplace study that was just completed last fall. Great progress, right? Since 2015, made good steps in terms of women in leadership. two big concerns. We are still, less in the mid 20s of representation of women in leadership as you get to that VP and above role when we start at 50%. So we're still losing, a quarter of our females for various reasons, not providing opportunities. People are like, oh, women are less ambitious. Oh, women are prioritizing staying at home. And they disprove all of that in the study based on all the data that they gave and said, no, women are just saying like, I'm not going to put up with this potentially, right? And that's what's causing some of that, but also a huge loss for women in color. So although we have seen women overall increase, the statistics that they quoted in the study around the loss of women in color in leadership actually over the last even 5 years is really concerning. And again,
Wow.
they no big silver bullet on why that's happening at this point, but I think it's something that we really need to continue to focus on in terms of, because I certainly see the diversity in my entry level population. And so like, where are we going wrong? Is it that we focused on providing opportunities for women and they're distorted, not towards women of color? And so we need to be more overt about that. Certainly that's going to be a piece of it for all people of color, to be honest. And so those are things that I really feel passionate about. And then as I think about significance, figuring out a way to be a part of making a difference, because there's also a ton of stuff out there that DE&I has sort of stalled. And obviously there's all these court cases in the colleges and things like that. So, what can we do about that? Is if we weren't successful under the banner of making it an initiative, then what is the real work that we have to do to change this trajectory? Because it'll take until 2097 or something at this pace
Right.
for us to get equity.
Oh man. It's so funny. I hadn't read that study. So now you've got me something that I'm going to go dig into and learn a little bit more about. Is there any advice that you can offer to our listeners who are likely leaders at all different stages and levels on how we can help with that, with addressing that point of diversity? I mean, I didn't realize that the women of color point was a staggering statistic, and I didn't realize that it was going down. What are some things that you think we can all be doing to continue to support that?
I think it's going to be back to some of the basics, right? I think that's maybe where some of the DE&I initiatives, they were highly aspirational versus going back to, why don't we have diversity in the slates of candidates that we're looking at? When we're looking at opportunities, why do we just automatically think that it's, this person who's standing in line or raising their hand versus really looking about the company? So I think some of these back to basics about how we're recruiting people, how we're providing that second level management, because that's really the step where we're losing them, is going from the entry level, maybe, analyst, senior analyst, to the manager level. And so what is it? I think thinking about accommodations, like I'm very eager to think about childcare. How do we get disenfranchised women back who can't actually work because they can't afford the childcare to be able to work? And those are things that we have to solve, right? Other countries have solved them. It's not like there's not a way, a path forward. And so I think as leaders, we can think about those things in our businesses. There are already some companies who are piloting subsidized childcare and seeing an uptick in productivity. And so it's a business imperative, right? Not just the right thing to do. So lots of thoughts on this, but I think that we really have to create overt plans of action that we could tell people to do, and maybe slightly less aspirational for the moment, because we need to make progress.
I love that advice, Laura. Thank you so much. And before we wrap up today, I want you to take a moment and think about, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from this conversation?
I think that you can make a difference. So no matter where you are in the business, people will say, well, I'm not a leader. You are, right? You lead yourself. You may influence the team around you. You may influence teams that you work with cross-functionally. So you have an impact on the business every day. And your change in your behavior, even a little bit, helping hand for one person, speaking out about something that should or shouldn't be a certain way, you really can. I'm a firm believer in this grassroots impact of, if we each do one thing, the multiplier effect will be really large. And so I think I challenge everyone to say, what is it I'm going to do tomorrow? It doesn't have to be lofty. it can just be something small to get started, and then it will kind of, spiral or spin up into something that's really impactful.
I love that advice, Laura. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for your time today. Your journey, obviously, is super inspiring. You've accomplished so much. I'm excited to continue to watch your journey and celebrate alongside of you. And thank you for raising so many important points in our episode today. I think listeners need to be more cognizant and aware of some of these things. And so I appreciate you pressing on some of these interesting topics. But I hope you enjoyed the conversation today as well.
Thanks, Chrissy. I loved it. I think we don't pause to think about these things. And so I really appreciate you pushing me, to have some hard thinking about this, and really, it was a really great conversation.
Oh, wonderful. Well, we're so thrilled. And I know that our listeners are going to get a lot of value from our conversation, at least as much as I did. And so thank you guys for everyone listening. If you enjoyed our episode today, please rate and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and go subscribe on YouTube and connect with me on LinkedIn. Until next time, we'll see you soon. Hi guys, I want to share a bit about an organization that I support called Wednesday Women. They're on a mission to increase the visibility of executive women leaders that you should know, learn from, and be inspired by. On LinkedIn, they share the profile of 2 amazing women each week, on Wednesdays of course. And now just imagine if we all followed, amplified, and nominated the women that we want to see more of. Their initiative provides examples of women CEOs, founders, sales executives, technical leaders, and so many more. By supporting Wednesday Women, you'll see more of these professionals in your social feeds, of course, but also on stages, podcasts, and panels. If you're interested in learning more and supporting their initiative, head over to www.wednesdaywomen.org or follow them on LinkedIn.